Michael Jackson and his family's relationship with the Watchtower organization is one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of popular music. It involves their mother's conversion that changed everything, Michael's impossible attempt to hold two incompatible worlds together, a groundbreaking music video that almost never existed, a friendship that ended because a girl asked a question, and a sister who wrote it all down in a book that her family didn't want published. Let's get into it. Everything starts with Katherine, because without Katherine's conversion, none of this story exists. Katherine grew up in Alabama and moved to Gary, Indiana as a young woman. She married Joe Jackson in 1949. She was raised in a mixed religious household. Her mother was a Baptist, her father a Lutheran, but by the time she was raising children in Gary, she had no firm religious home. And then someone knocked on her door. And after Katherine became a member of the Jehovah's Witnesses in 1966, the rest of the family followed. The Watchtower's framework became the framework of the Jackson household, with one critical exception. Joe Jackson never converted. He was not a witness, and that tension between the father who drove his sons to fame with the ferocity that the Watchtower would have considered worldly ambition at its most extreme, and the mother whose faith taught that worldly success was spiritually dangerous, that ran through the Jackson family like a fault line for decades. Katherine Jackson is a conscientious witness to this day. Rebe, Michael's older sister, is a devout witness to this day. Rebe's husband, Nathaniel Brown, became a congregation elder, the same elder who would one day corner Latoya in a hallway and tell her she was never allowed to speak to her only friend again. So the Watchtower became embedded in the family. Now let me tell you about Michael's relationship with the faith, because it was not superficial. It was genuine, deep, and for the most of his career, absolute. As his celebrity grew and door-to-door ministry became impossible without causing a scene, he found a solution that is both extraordinary and completely within character. He disguised himself, and in an interview with the TV Guide in 2001, Michael was asked if he was still a Jehovah's Witness. Without hesitating, he answered yes. He said, "We call it pioneering. We do 90 hours a month. You go door to door. I wear a fat suit, pop bottle glasses, mustache, buck teeth, and an afro wig, and I knock on the door and say, 'We're Jehovah's Witnesses.'"
There was no rest for my professional lifestyle, for on Sundays I would go pioneering, the term used for the missionary work that Jehovah's Witnesses do. And it was then that I was able to see the magic of other people's childhood. Since I was already a celebrity, I would have to put on a disguise, a fat suit, a wig, a beard, and glasses. And we would spend the day in the suburbs of Southern California, going door to door or making the rounds of shopping malls, distributing our Watchtower magazines. I loved to set foot on all those regular suburban houses and catch sight of the fireplaces and lazy boy armchairs, with kids playing Monopoly and grandmas babysitting, all those wonderful, ordinary, and starry scenes of everyday life. Many, I know, would argue that these things seem like no big deal, but to me, they were mesmerizing.
Latoya writes in her book, Latoya Growing Up in the Jackson Family, that many Jehovah's Witnesses used to congregate outside the Kingdom Hall, hoping to catch a glimpse of Michael Jackson, knowing full well this kind of adulation was forbidden. Michael did everything humanly possible to demonstrate his dedication to Jehovah. Once, when an elder criticized his sexually suggestive stage movements, he complied without protest and promptly changed the routine. He also invited an elder on tour to see for himself that he lived in harmony with all the faith's rules. An elder told the greatest entertainer alive that his stage moves were too sexually suggestive, and Michael Jackson, without argument, without protest, changed the routine. That is not the behavior of a man going through the motions of a faith his mother chose. That is a man who genuinely believed, a man who was trying with everything he had to reconcile the Watchtower's demands with a creative genius that was simply too large for any organization to contain. And for a while, for years, he managed it. Just barely, but he managed it. Until Thriller. On the back of the release of the Thriller album in 1983, Michael Jackson released Thriller, the music video, directed by John Landis, 14 minutes long, featuring Michael transforming into a werewolf and leading an army of zombies through a choreographed dance sequence. It was unlike anything that had ever been made. It was a cultural event. It remains to this day one of the most watched music videos in history. And it almost didn't exist. Because when the Jehovah's Witness elders in Michael's congregation saw it, or learned of its content, they told him clearly, this video is demonic. This is occult material. A man of faith does not make films about werewolves and the living dead. When elders told him the Thriller video was demonic and part of the occult, Michael called his lawyer sobbing and said, destroy the video. He was so committed to his faith, so frightened of losing his standing in the congregation that he was willing to destroy the most ambitious piece of work he had ever created. He called his lawyer and told him to make it disappear. His lawyer and director John Landis did not destroy it. They hid the footage. They bought time. And eventually, after considerable negotiation, a compromise was reached. Right at the beginning, there is a title card. It reads, due to my strong personal convictions, I wish to stress that this film in no way endorses a belief in the occult. That disclaimer is not a legal formality. It is not a standard disclaimer. That disclaimer is a direct product of Watchtower pressure. Michael's attempt to keep his faith and his art simultaneously alive. The elders were not satisfied. Latoya writes in her book, on the Victory Tour, Michael hired someone whose sole task was to locate a Kingdom Hall in each town so that Michael wouldn't miss a single meeting. Michael won those record-breaking 8 honors at the 1984 Grammy Awards. The very next morning, one elder issued him an ultimatum that my brother must choose between music and the Jehovah's Witness religion. Because Michael diligently studied the Bible, he could usually cite chapter and verse supporting his contention that entertaining people was not wrong. I'm still living according to the Watchtower Society's teachings, he pointed out, as he'd done so many times before. I still go door to door wherever I am, even if I'm on tour. I can't help it if people hang up my poster on their wall or tear my picture out of a magazine. I don't ask them to idolize me. I only want them to enjoy my music. She goes on to tell the following story. One day I walked into Janet's room to find Michael crying his eyes out. Latoya, I can't talk to you ever again. The elders had a big meeting and they told me never to speak to you because you haven't been coming to the Kingdom Hall. They said that if I don't stop talking to you, they'll kick me out of the religion. Michael decided to disobey the elders' edict, and after that, never attended any more meetings. He subsequently severed his ties to the organization through a formal letter. So the pressure continued, and by the spring of 1987, 4 years after Thriller, at the height of the bad era, Michael made a decision. A letter from the Jehovah's Witness headquarters in Brooklyn, New York, sent as a press release, stated that the organization no longer considers Michael Jackson to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. He had disassociated himself. The organization sent this letter to the congregations with regard to the issue. It reads, Dear brothers, there has been some publicity given in recent days concerning Michael Jackson. The substance of these reports deal with his disassociating himself from the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. Some phone calls have also been received about a society letter, copies of which have apparently been made available to the news media as well as others to the effect that he does not consider himself to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society does not consider Michael Jackson to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. There is no need for the News Service Department or others to make any comments with regard to personalities outside of those who are on the convention programs and the speakers to be quoted in the news releases that you have as part of the News Service kit. In the event that representatives of the news media or others may approach your convention news service department and inquire about Michael Jackson and his position, it would be best for the brothers in charge not to comment. They should simply say that they have heard or know about the news reports and have no further comment. As to any letter, the district convention committees of personnel did not write the letter, and so they are not in a position to comment on it. The King of Pop had committed in the Watchtower's theological framework the unforgivable sin by disassociating himself from the organization. And his mother, a devout witness to this day, was now technically required to shun her own son. She refused. Katherine Jackson kept her relationship with Michael intact in defiance of the doctrine that the organization her faith had built into her bones was demanding she follow. And speaking from experience, that act of maternal defiance is one of the most human moments in this entire story. Now I want to return to Latoya because her story is distinct from Michael's and in some ways even more revealing about how the Watchtower operates on ordinary people rather than global superstars. Latoya published her autobiography in 1991, a book her family publicly opposed with a cover quote that read, "The one my family doesn't want you to read." And inside that book, there is a passage about the Watchtower that I think is one of the clearest, most human illustrations of how shunning actually works that I've ever read. Latoya writes about growing up inside the congregation, about how the Watchtower's rule of associating exclusively with other members meant that she and Michael had almost no friends outside the family. And then she writes about one exception. Her name was Darles. She writes in her book, "Michael and I were very active in the Jehovah's Witness faith. 5 days a week, the two of us and Mother studied the Bible at home and attended the Kingdom Hall. Every morning, Michael and I witnessed, knocking on doors around Los Angeles, spreading the word of Jehovah. As my brother's fame grew, he had to don convincing disguises like a rubber fat suit he bought years later. Because we were supposed to associate exclusively with other members, Michael and I made few friends at the private high school. We did, however, become close with another Jehovah's Witness. Darles was my first and only friend outside the family, and I treasured the time we spent together. Each day at lunch, the three of us studied the Bible together. She also joined us at the Kingdom Hall. During a meeting, Darles bravely challenged one of the elders. The elder's reply was typical. He cited the scripture, which supported his position, but did not really address Darles's point. So she wrote a letter. This outraged the other elders. One day, Reeby's husband, Nathaniel Brown, also an elder, cornered me. "Latoya," he said, "you're never allowed to speak to Darles again. Ever. She's been disfellowshipped." After that, neither Michael nor I had anything to do with Darles. We missed her so much and for the first time began to privately reconsider some of the Watchtower Society's teachings. We felt that questions should be encouraged, not silenced through threats of disfellowship. A friend, a real one, someone Latoya treasured, and then, during a meeting, Darles bravely challenged one of the elders. The elder's reply was typical. He cited the scripture, which supported his position but did not really address Darles's point, so she wrote a letter. This outraged the elders. She asked a question. The elder couldn't properly answer, and then she wrote it down, and that, asking a question and writing it down, was enough. One day, Reeby's husband, Nathaniel Brown, also an elder, cornered Latoya, and he said, that she is never allowed to speak to Darles ever again. She's been disfellowshipped. After that, neither Michael nor Latoya had anything to do with Darles. Latoya's only friend outside the family, a girl who had committed no moral violation, who had harmed no one, who had simply asked a question that an elder couldn't answer and then written about it, wrote it down, was disfellowshipped. And Latoya and Michael, two of the most famous young people on earth, complied. They cut her off completely because Reeby's husband told them to. Latoya herself was eventually disfellowshipped in the late 1980s. Her abusive manager and husband, Jack Gordon, pushed her into behavior that was the polar opposite of everything the longtime Jehovah's Witness believed in, including posing for Playboy magazine. Katherine Jackson watched her daughter's behavior shift and believed Gordon was deliberately isolating Latoya from her family so he could become the dominant influence in her life. She was right. After Latoya left Gordon in the mid-1990s, she spent years rebuilding her relationship with her family. And when asked about organized religion, Latoya said, "No. Actually, I'm a very spiritual person and I do believe in God. Personally, in my own life, I don't believe in organized religion whatsoever." Now, let me pull all of this together because the Jackson family story with the Watchtower is not just a fascinating celebrity footnote. It is a case study in exactly how the organization operates, its strengths, its mechanisms, and its costs. Katherine's conversion restructured an entire family. It gave her something real: community, framework, answers, meaning. And it embedded the organization's authority deep inside the Jackson household in a way that would shape every member of that family for generations. Michael's story shows you what happens when someone with a genuinely enormous life tries to live inside the Watchtower's framework. He was sincere. He was devoted. He wore a fat suit to knock on doors. He changed his stage moves because an elder told him to. And then he sobbed on the phone to his lawyer about a music video. And in the end, his art, which was simply too large, too alive, too human to be contained by any doctrine, won. But it cost him his standing in the only religious community he had ever known. And it cost his mother, a devout witness, the impossible choice between her faith's demands and her son. Darles' story shows you what the shunning doctrine does to the most ordinary, most human thing in the world: a friendship between teenagers. Michael wanted his children to be raised as Jehovah's Witnesses, should anything happen to him. And after his funeral, his children were seen attending a Kingdom Hall in Los Angeles with their grandmother. Even after everything, after the Thriller disclaimer, after the disassociation, after 15 years away from the organization, Michael still believed in what his mother had given him enough to want it for his children. And I want to end this episode with Latoya's voice because she earned the right to the last word here. In 1991, she published the book her family didn't want published. Inside it, she described growing up in a household shaped by Joe Jackson's violence, Katherine Jackson's faith, and the Watchtower's total authority over who you could love and who you had to cut off. She described her only friend being taken from her in a hallway by an elder who was also her brother-in-law. She described Michael changing his stage moves because an elder told him to. She described a family bound together and pulled apart simultaneously by the same organization. And then she said clearly, on the record, that she no longer believes in organized religion at all. This is a conclusion arrived at through lived experience, and it is the conclusion that millions of former Jehovah's Witnesses arrive at through their own versions of the same journey, minus the fame, minus the fat suit, minus the music videos. Just the meetings, the door knocking, the shunning, and eventually the door out. Latoya found the door, Michael found it, and then spent the rest of his life uncertain whether he should have gone through it. That is the Watchtower story, the human cost. Subscribe if you haven't already, share and like if you found this video interesting, and tell me what you think in the comment section. Until next time.